The Sony PlayStation, you know it, you love it, and back in the mid-90s, the PS1 catapulted gaming into the 3D era, even though in most cases the Nintendo 64 looked and played better, but the 64 used cartridges and the PlayStation used CDs, so it did better. Just barely, though. Now, as the cycle states, the most popular console has to have a mountain of games that never get brought up in conversation, sometimes because they're weird and obscure, or because they're just bad. Usually that. So that's why I'm here today, to talk about the games that no one else will, the unsung heroes, the unsung guys in the back. These are some weird PlayStation games.
Tactical idiot deployed.
Okay, imagine this scenario. Hey boss, so we had this great idea for a game. So basically you herd sheep, but there's also like this alien invasion with like demon sheep from hell or something like that, and the sheep are really important to stopping it, and the game is overall really wacky. Like the cows are just big cartons of milk, there's this Elvis sheep thing, and a big dance party, and yeah. That sounds really dumb. Yeah, it does, it does, doesn't it? It was just a joke anyway, So yeah, yeah, I'll get going now. Hey, the sheep game is a no-go, guys. Boss said no. About that, we already shipped the games out. You what? That is how I think the game Sheep for the PS1 was made. Also, all of that stuff I said earlier is actually in the game. Sheep, created in the bowels of Empire Interactive, is a game about herding sheep. I think you're doing it to stop some alien invasion, but I genuinely could not tell you. Nothing here makes sense, and I mean nothing. The gameplay loop mainly consists of you taking sheep from one end of the map to the other while solving puzzles and keeping your sheep from dying. It's a fairly basic loop, and the game isn't bad, but it really could be better. My biggest complaint is this game's lack of joystick support, which is especially stupid because this was a pretty late PS1 game. So late, in fact, that the PS2 was already out. But anyways, you also have a call thing. It's basically scares sheep away from you. It only works like a third of the time. You also have a run button, which is... Ultimately, Sheep isn't a bad game, it's just clunky. I mean, if you play via the method that shall not be named, you could bind movement to the joystick, but don't tell anyone I said you could do that. Anywho, I give Sheep a Hellspawn out of 10. Streets. Racers. Put them together and what do you get? You get a big steaming pile of shit. So you know how nowadays Ubisoft can't make a good game unless Nintendo is breathing down their neck? Well, it's kinda always been that way. Want proof? Just look at this. It looks like a Super Nintendo game.
That's probably because it is!
I mean, here's peak performance. Now here's Street Racer. Released the same year, by the way. Now I can complain all day about how bad this game looks, but I won't, even though I did find a hole in one of the maps, but I'll refrain. So, how does it play? Like it was made for a SNES controller. Seriously, despite being on the PlayStation, this game does nothing to utilize the two new buttons on the controller. And another question. Why is up on the D-pad jump? Okay. Well, maybe the tracks can make up some points. They all suck. Well, at least we got such memorable characters like Indian Papa Smurf and Woman and everyone else. Who am I kidding? There's nothing redeeming about this game, and it dares to have Rayman on the back of the manual. Gross! Pepsiman is probably by far the most well-known of these games, but brought up in the conversation of good games, it is not. Pepsiman was a campaign of ads for Pepsi that were done in Japan. Despite being a financial failure, Pepsiman has actually gained quite the cult following online over the years. Honestly, I don't know how Pepsiman could have failed, especially when you throw Pepsi Woman in the mix. But despite all that, apparently Pepsiman was popular enough to appear in Fighting Vipers on the Sega Saturn and get his own game on the PlayStation. Now, looking at Pepsiman, some of you probably thought that this was the funny TikTok game that would be put under Family Guy clips, but you'd be wrong. Pepsiman is an auto-runner game where you try to get to the end of a stage and solve all of the world's problems with Pepsi. Most of this game has you following behind Pepsiman, but sometimes you'll get to see his front side too. Every level has 3 parts, 2 where the camera is placed behind Pepsiman and 1 where you're running away from something and the camera is placed in front of you. And usually it's so close you can see up Pepsiman's nose. Pepsiman wouldn't be that bad if the camera was just placed in a different freaking spot, like 80% of the time. Now, even though Pepsiman is a very bizarre game, the game itself is far from the weirdest thing on the disc. It's actually this guy. In between each chapter, there are these live-action cutscenes featuring a large man, and I don't mean he's fat, I mean he's a big guy. Look at how small that can of Pepsi is in his hand. This game was a Japanese exclusive, by the way. These usually consist of the guy yapping about whatever while drinking Pepsi and snacking on other products owned by PepsiCo. Ultimately, the game ends with the guy drinking enough Pepsi to feed a small village, and he has to take the quickest piss anyone has ever seen. Now, I actually really liked my time at Pepsiman. I didn't think it was that bad of a game. In fact, it inspired me to continue shamelessly advertising for Pepsi for free, even though I'm more of a Coca-Cola guy myself. Listen, Squirt is a Pepsi product. What, you really expect me to go out and get some actual Pepsi for a stupid joke? There. Happy? In conclusion, this was a big waste of my time. But at the same time, I really enjoyed this. I kinda have a thing for collecting weird games. But if you want to see more wacky games that'll make you question humanity's existence, do the YouTuber buzzword stuff of liking and subscribing, and I'll do more of this. Actually, I just do it anyways, but with that, have a good rest of your day, and goodbye.